Joining me now from Boston is the US presidential candidate Jill Stein from the Green Party. She believes that parties like her own are the key to reforming America's political system and democracy. Jill Stein, thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers. I just want to start with one point. You're the most successful woman to ever run for the presidency, but you won less than 1% of the vote in 2012. Would you agree you have no chance this year?
I think my chance is like that of the average American, to tell you the truth, who's really up against very steep odds for a job, for a decent wage, for health care, for a young person to get out of debt. We have an entire generation which is locked into basically unpayable predatory debt. So I'd say I'm in very good company in having a very difficult time working with the system as it exists.
Jill, what do you put it down to? Do you think there are systemic obstacles to you doing well in this year's election?
There certainly are systemic obstacles, but you know, when people ask me, are you going to win? I say, I'm not holding my breath, but I'm not ruling it out. I think the very important thing is that we build this vast social movement, which is quite powerful right now. In fact, half of Americans have already divorced the Democratic and Republican parties. There's majority disapproval, actually, for both of the parties right now.
Well, let me pick you up on that, Jill. Let me pick you up on that. The Republicans have 30 million members. The Democrats have 43 million. Your party has 250,000. So if you look at it, it seems that the Republicans and Democrats do enjoy far greater support than your party.
Another way to look at it, though, is that 50% of Americans do not identify with either Democrats or Republicans. According to the Wall Street Journal poll, it's 21% of the entire electorate that actually supports Republicans, 29% that identifies as Democrats. The reason we do poorly in polls is because people don't know we exist. We are systematically blocked out of media coverage and the debates, but increasingly people are getting their news and their information from social media, from websites and so on, in the same way that the two energized campaigns now within the Democrats and Republicans are both outsiders. Approximately 60% are clamoring for a new independent third party. So the question is, when is that house of cards going to fall down? It's going to, and the further we get, the closer we are to that breakthrough.
You make a very interesting point there about the two outsiders, Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. When you see those two men who are, you could almost say, polar opposites, really, doing very well, what does that tell you about America today?
It tells you that America is in revolt. And what those two groups have in common is that they've both been thrown under the bus economically. The Sanders supporters are younger, more socially liberal. The Trump supporters are older and more socially conservative. But they share very similar views about the economy, about trade, to some extent about our foreign policy as well. So this is a movement that's really looking for a political base, because the establishment parties are essentially at war with the agendas of both the Trump and the Sanders campaign. The Green Party offers a place.
Yeah, let's take a quick look at Bernie Sanders then. I imagine you and Mr. Sanders have quite a lot in common in terms of values. If you see that he has become the Democrat nominee, would you pull out of the race in order to avoid the risk of splitting the vote, to give him the maximum chance against the Republicans?
Well, let me say, first of all, the Democrats are not going to allow him to become the nominee. They have what we call a kill switch, that's superdelegates and Super Tuesdays and smear campaigns, like the way they took down Howard Dean with the Dean Scream. You may recall that public relations campaign. So it's extremely unlikely, it's vanishingly unlikely that he will get that nomination. At the same time, we've been putting out an effort to dialogue with the Sanders campaign for quite some time. But fundamentally, I think that that concept of independent parties being a threat is a problem. That is the propaganda campaign that's used by the powers that be to stay the course. The politics of fear has basically delivered everything we were afraid of. So we say reject the lesser evil, we have to fight for the greater good.
But your predecessor, Ralph Nader, made things harder, most commentators would say, for Al Gore in 2000 and perhaps tipped the balance towards George Bush's victory. So what I'm asking you is, if Bernie Sanders gets the nomination, will you pull out to make sure the same thing doesn't happen again this year?
So let me just say that it was the Supreme Court, not the voters. In fact, Al Gore lost
a much
many
closer
times
contest,
more
didn't it?
voters. No, not really. No, it was the huge number of Democratic voters that went over to the other side. Nader's voters were a tiny sliver. So blaming the defection of voters out of Gore's campaign on Greens, who were a tiny sliver of what he lost, is really a propaganda campaign.
All right, well, we'll leave it there, but I need to ask you, if Bernie Sanders wins the nomination, will you pull out to give him a better chance?
I'll just say that I've been looking to dialogue with Senator Sanders.
Okay.
Actually, for many years, the Green Party has been trying to have that dialogue.
Okay, let's move on to some of the most important obstacles to third parties today. Let's start with the electoral system. Many people say that the way that candidates, if they win, they take first place. Even if they don't get 50%, they take it all. Isn't that the key? You need electoral system reform to allow third parties to do anything at all.
Exactly. And those reforms are simple and easy. In the presidential race, we need a reform called ranked choice voting. It lets you rank your choices instead of just voting for one person. And it guarantees that if you vote for an underdog based on your principles and your beliefs, and that underdog loses, your vote is reassigned to your second choice. We could actually pass that right now. The states have the authority to pass that in their legislatures. So that any possibility for splitting the vote could be preempted right now. My campaign, this was when I first ran for office in 2002, running for governor against Mitt Romney. My campaign helped get that legislation filed in the Massachusetts legislature so there would be no splitting of the vote. But the Democrats rely on fear in order to keep their voters voting for them. So they will continue to do that. This is not a reform that's going to go down easily. We're going to have to push this in every way that we can.
So the Democrats and the Republicans enjoy this duopoly. They control the rules. There's really no chance of any reform for the electoral process in the near future, is there, in a word?
I think we don't know. I think it's hard to say there's no chance. If they see that we are truly a threat, then they may actually pass these reforms.
Okay,
I think that's our job.
Let's get to another subject really quickly. We're running out of time, and that is funding. The federal government provides matching funds if you get over a certain threshold. But really, those funds rarely go to any other party other than the Republicans and Democrats. Why is it so hard for third parties to get that support?
Well, so let me say, we are getting some of that funding right now. We have achieved matching funds. So for every dollar we raise, we basically get a dollar from the federal government. But there's another threshold which is difficult to get to. But, we are in a moving target right now. Life is becoming very difficult and unlivable for, dare I say, the majority of Americans. They say we're in a recovery, but in fact, it's an emergency. So this is a moving target. I'd say stay tuned. Many of Bernie's supporters are looking to us to be their plan B. So we could see the equation change here very soon.
And just finally, Jill, people are trying to understand in the United States if the Democrats and the Republicans are polarized and further apart than ever, or if, as you say, and Noam Chomsky says, and Ron Paul says, you're living essentially in a one-party state where the two overlap so much and are the slaves of Wall Street that actually those divisions are not real, they're not substantive. It is actually just one political elite. We don't understand which of those analyses is correct.
In my view, the Democrats and Republicans share the basic agenda for an economy that's controlled by the 1%, for a foreign policy that's great for the defense contractors, but terrible for human rights, international law, and the people of America and the world. Now, the parties differ on the social issues, but at the end of the day, and they have the media behind them to really crack the whip on those social issues. I think if we get to the microphone, typically we win.
Right.
And that's why the powers that be are so frightened. So I think the name of the day here is breaking through and helping the American people understand that there really is a way forward by which we can rescue our future, make it healthy, just, democratic, and green for us all.
Jill Stein, presidential candidate, thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers.